From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode on what's holding you back. I wanted to really just do a podcast episode on this. It's been sort of on my mind lately. I'm working on a new book, and this is kind of one of the concepts in the book. And then I thought, you know what? I really want to do a podcast on this and drill down into this in this episode because a lot of times we want to move forward in life. I mean, we all want to move forward in life, but a lot of times we don't really think about what's stopping us from moving back, personally or professionally, right? We don't always think about what is really holding us back, what is preventing us from getting to the next level. However, we define that, whatever that next level is for us, we don't always stop to think about what is holding us back relative to reaching it. And I think a lot of times, or probably most of the time, what's holding us back in life, in our personal relationships, in our professional career or trajectory or business development, most of the time, what's holding us back in life can be traced back to our character. And that's going to be a hard pill for some people to swallow, but when I say character, character is more than just bad or good, right? Character is not just are you a bad person, are you a good person? Character is the moral qualities, the values and the characteristics that make up who you are as a person. The traits of your character that make up who you are as a person, because who you are is determining how you do what you do and what you do and why you do it. And all of those things are impacting your influence in life and your opportunities in life and your options in life. And there again, this applies both personally in our personal relationships with our children, our spouse, our friends, but it's also determining those things relative to our professional life, our career path, our career opportunities, our future promotions. If you own your own business, it's determining your relationship with your clients and your customers, right? But we don't always stop to think about drilling down intentionally to what are the roadblocks relative to my character that are holding me back and preventing me from achieving that next level of success. So when we think about that, character development or developing areas of character, whatever's holding us back, it's really critical that we think about developing the weaknesses, the weak areas of our character. You know, I always heard a lot of times in my career we would talk about, oh, you should be a well-rounded person, so you need to work on developing your areas, your weak areas and your strong areas. And that's true, but probably not in the way that I often heard it in the early years in my career. I don't want to be a well-rounded person when it comes to competencies. Competencies are the things, the skills, the things that we do, the knowledge that we have, our talents. I don't want to be well-rounded when it comes to competency. I want to be a star, right? There are going to be areas of your competency that you are more gifted at, more talented at, and you want to develop your strengths when it comes to competency because that's where you can shine like the star, right? There are going to be stronger areas and weaker areas relative to competency. You want to develop those strengths. So, for example, the example that I use is I'm not particularly naturally talented or gifted as a singer. And I could spend the next 20 years developing my competency as a vocalist or as a singer, but I'm never going to have as much influence as a singer as someone like Whitney Houston, right? Naturally talented in some areas is going to take us further in terms of competency than our weak areas. Because if I develop the competency of singing for the next 20 years, I'm never going to be more than average when it comes to that. I'm never going to have that natural gift, that natural talent, that natural head start. And so I'm never going to have as much influence relative to competency if I develop my weaknesses. I want to develop my strengths. And that's okay. I don't have to be working on my strength and competency as a singer because I'm not naturally gifted there. There are plenty of other areas where I am naturally gifted. I want to work on those strengths when it comes to competency again. But relative to character, we need to develop our weaknesses, our weak areas, those areas that we are not strong in, because these are holding us back. And one of the best examples that I share with people in terms of how your weak areas of character can be holding you back is something like keeping commitments. For example, if you are a person who is chronically late for appointments for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, for multiple reasons, you have a pattern of always being late. That is costing you influence in your relationships. If you're always late to work, you are going to have less influence with your leader, with your manager, than if you are always on time or maybe even a few minutes early because your boss is going to know they can't count on you to be on time. And so that's going to cost you some measure of influence. Now, here's the thing. It's costing you some measure of influence with respect to those people who are maybe better at that area of character than you are, right? They're a little more ahead of you, a little further along on that journey of character development than you are. And so if you're not as strong in this area, particular area of character, it's going to cost you influence. If maybe you're chronically late, but you're only 5 minutes chronically late, th- that probably is not going to cost you influence with someone who's always chronically 30 minutes late. You see what my point here is? It cost us influence relative to those people who are a little further ahead on the journey than we are. So, but think about that. If you are chronically late, if you just have that pattern for whatever reason, again, now, and I am talking about a pattern. Of course, sometimes life is going to get in the way. Things are going to happen occasionally. Maybe there was a wreck on the interstate and you hit a bunch of traffic and ultimately we could trace that back to sure you could have left earlier, but in general, I'm talking about a pattern of always being late, a chronic pattern of not being able to keep your commitments. If I say I'm going to have coffee with you and I'm going to meet you at 10 o'clock at Starbucks, but you don't get there until 10:15 or 10:30, the next time you tell me you're going to meet me at 10 o'clock, I'm not going to have quite as much trust that you can keep that commitment to me. And so that will cost you a little bit of influence. Now, if you have a strong relationship with someone based on a long time, and maybe we've been having coffee at Starbucks at 10 o'clock for years and years and years, and so you're late one time, that's not going to cost you quite as much influence as it would as if you were late every time. So it could this lack of keeping commitments could hold us back in our personal relationships with your friends. If you're always late to meet your coffee date, then that's going to cost you some influence. If you're always late to work, that's going to cost you influence in your professional relationships. Or think about this. If you are a business owner and you are always late to meet your clients, they're going to be less likely to bring their business to you in the future. They're going to go find someone that they can count on, that they can depend on. And so that might not be a challenge for you. But if you do have a pattern of always being late, I mean, maybe it's a lack of planning on your part, or maybe you're not able to lead yourself well relative to your activities and your energy and your schedule. Maybe you just can't you always hit the snooze button 3 times, and so you don't get up on time, and so you're always late for work. But whatever it is, maybe it's just something else that creates that. But if you have a pattern for always being late and not keeping that commitment, it means you just cannot lead yourself well relative to the schedule. It will decrease trust. Well, maybe that's not your challenge. But it's important for us to think about where are the areas relative to character weaknesses that are holding us back. Because if you develop them, if you do have a chronic pattern of being late for commitments and appointments, if you develop that, you will start to have more influence in those relationships over time. It's not going to, you can't rebuild that area of trust immediately. If you're always late to work and the next Monday you suddenly start to show up at work on time, the first day you're not going to have a whole lot more influence based on that. But if you do it for the next 30 years, then you will start to have much more influence relative to that area. So it does take time to rebuild that. Now, that's just one example. And that might not be your example, but it's just one example to give you kind of that example of how this plays out in our personal and professional relationships, how something, a weakness of your character, and again, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. We all have weaknesses and we all have strengths. But relative to your influence, I want you to think about what's holding you back. And there are plenty of areas of character that can be holding us back. I certainly have plenty of my own areas and weaknesses that hold us back. And that's something I continue to work on to develop. And, I've worked on that and I've grown through the years relative to my weaknesses of character. And I've built more influence because of that. But it's something that we can always work on, right? Developing our character is a journey. We're not going to wake up one day and suddenly be perfect people. We'll always have areas where we can improve and grow. And we just want to focus on what those are for us individually. And I can't tell you what your areas are, but I'll throw out a few here that might be some areas of character that could be holding you back. Maybe these aren't your challenges, but something like arrogance, right? If you have an inflated opinion of yourself and a lack of humility, that's going to hold you back. That's going to cost you influence with some people. Maybe it's a lack of empathy. Maybe you don't have great listening skills, and that's holding you back relative to your personal relationships. Maybe you're that type of person that you're just always looking for the negative. You're gloom and doom. You're always seeing the downside. You never have the positives. That's going to cost you influence with someone who is more optimistic. Maybe you are hypocritical. You say one thing, but you do another. That's costing you influence with someone who is walking the talk, right? Maybe you have a prejudice, a preconceived opinion that's not necessarily based on reality. That's costing you influence with someone who is more willing to learn, is more willing to base their opinions on reality instead of preconceived notions. Maybe it's indecisiveness. Maybe you just can't make a decision. You're wishy-washy. Somebody says, "Hey, you want to do such and such on Saturday?" And you're like, "Oh, I don't know. I'll get back to you." And the next day you don't get back to them and you just can't make up your mind and they call you again and they say, "Hey, do you want to do such and such on Saturday?" And you're like, "Oh, I just don't know." Right? That could be costing you influence with someone who is decisive. So you begin to see how the different areas of weaknesses of character can hold us back relative to someone who's stronger in that area. But as we develop them, we can create more influence in that relationship. Maybe you're impatient. That's going to cost you influence. If you have a dentist appointment and it's, 11 o'clock is your dentist appointment, and you show up a few minutes before 11 and the receptionist is like, "Hey, we're running a little behind schedule. If you'll just take a seat, it's going to be a few minutes before we call you." And you sit there, but you're impatient and you're unable to wait. And you're just, start getting frustrated and loud about having to wait and start complaining about that, right? That impatience is going to cost you some measure of influence with the people around you. They're going to know that you are impatient when it comes to your character. Now, there again, all of this is relative to your influence. It's not about, is this a good quality. It doesn't mean you're a good person or a bad person. It means this is an area of opportunity for you to develop. And as you develop that strength or as you develop that weakness of character, you can develop more influence. Now, I'm just throwing out some areas that could be potential weaknesses of character. And these might not be yours. It's certainly not a complete list, but just some qualities to think about or suggest as possibilities as you consider what could be holding you back and where should you begin to develop. So, for me, one of the traits that I had to develop myself in order to develop my character was my ability to connect with people. I've mentioned this before. I'm naturally a task focused person. And there again, that's not bad or good. It's just an area of opportunity for me because I am task focused. My weakness of character was that anytime I'm doing something, I'm not as focused on connecting with the people around me. For example, when I come home from buying groceries, my my number one focus is to put the groceries away. I'm just task focused, like this is something I need to do, right? And typically what happens is or Mac will start to help me bring in the groceries, and then he wants to share something that he's thinking about or reading or something that happened. And where I've had to work to develop my weaknesses of character is instead of just shutting him out and focusing on getting the groceries put away, is stopping to connect with him and listen to him or talk to him and make that connection. And the groceries, let's be honest, the groceries can wait a couple of minutes. It's not going to be the end of the world um, if I don't get all of the groceries in the refrigerator in the next 3 minutes. But that could hold me back if I'm not willing to grow in that area and say, hey, sometimes I need to be more people focused and less task focused, right? That was an area of opportunity for me to develop that. And I've worked really hard at developing that over the years. I'm still naturally task focused, but now I'm more aware of that. And I'm more aware of where the opportunities are for me to improve that, to focus on developing that. And I've grown in that area. Now, this is just one example for me, and this might not be your area of opportunity. Perhaps you're more people focused naturally. And so sometimes you have a difficulty staying on task in a meeting because you're more interested in talking to the people around you. That could be your area of opportunity to develop, to increase your influence relative to productivity at work, right? Different ways of looking at that. But my point here is to encourage you to think about just spend some time over the next few days or the next week brainstorming on where are the areas of character that you can improve on and therefore develop more influence with the people around you, personally or professionally. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.